All right, welcome back to Voyager Upon the Dawn. I have a very fun special show today. We're going to be talking about our favorite Marvel movies. We're going to be talking about just the MCU in general. Um, it's going to be a lot of fun, and got a very special guest here, my good buddy Cam. Say hi to all the fine folks out there.
Well,
Um,
hello, and thanks for having me on, Christopher. I think it's going to be a fun afternoon.
Absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to this. So, real quick, for the viewer, the structure is going to be we're going to just kind of go through our top five, kind of give overall thoughts on the MCU, specifically the Infinity Saga that kind of tied everything together. And just for fun, at the end, we're going to each kind of become the producer and say if I could make one either movie or TV series going forward, this would be. So, without further ado, take it away, Cam.
All right. Well, first off, again, thanks for having me on. It's always sort of a fun conversation to have to explore the MCU, especially closing out of Phase 3 last year with Infinity War and Endgame, and now we're on to sort of this Phase 4, and there's a lot of Can Kevin Feige, can he do that again? Can he do this sort of almost like decade worth? I think like through Phase 3, it was like $20 billion worth of movie going to profit, and so he set the bar extremely high. So and it was fun to sort of grow up during that era and be able to watch it live. It's fun to revisit it and to go back and not having to wait periods between the movies. You can just sort of watch them all, straight through on Disney Plus, which I, may or may not have done. But yeah, so it's a fun, great topic. And then when you said you wanted to do the top five, I think naturally it makes sense. Like, hey, let's start at the bottom and work our way to our favorites. But I had a real hard time at the bottom, right? Because that's the cutoff between who makes the playoffs and who doesn't, right? So like my number 6, 7, or 8, like that could very easily have been number 5, and so I had to like really think through of, if I had to make a decision and quantify it, like where would I start? So yeah, so I guess to answer the question, my number 5 movie in the MCU was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and I love the Guardians of the Galaxy. First off, because it expanded the MCU universe, right? So up until then, everything was really held on Earth. And there was some like predictions, and like Loki came and Thor sort of expanded it as like there's like these other worlds. But Guardians of the Galaxy just blew it up into the extent that like this place is like very vast and expansive, and they're like this whole another dimension of superheroes and villains. So I like the Guardians of the Galaxy. Plus, they're all a bunch of characters, which makes them very watchable, I think, and rewatchable. The slapstick one-liners. I think that I may or may not have this right, but like the awesome mix, the soundtrack to the Guardians of the Galaxy, it was like a number 1 soundtrack, and I listen to it frequently, right? Because it's all yeah, it's these like all-star blockbuster, songs. They're all very nostalgic, and it's great. Other things I like about Guardian of the Galaxy 2, they're sort of pandering to, with Baby Groot. So my kids love Baby Groot, because he's just adorable, and sort of he's a risk, right? He's running around with the detonator button, and like you don't know if he's gonna like do the right thing in the end or not, and so he's sort of like brings this own sort of comical suspense to it. I like the fact that Star-Lord's father gets revealed as Ego, and then he's a Celestial, right? And so it's our first real introduction to Celestials, which are big within the comic series, but not so much in the MCU up to that point. There were some, right, but not a lot. Now you have sort of like a real villain Celestial, and you sort of understood there's like this another dimension of villains to that. And so I think like a lot of those things were just a lot of the things that I really liked about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 specifically. And so that's what made my number 5 hit. How about
Gotcha.
you?
We may be talking about that one a little bit more in the future. It's
Yeah.
not my number 5.
Yeah.
So my number completely agree as far as like, okay, well, who's going to make the cut and who's not going to make the cut. So I did cheat a little bit. So when we finish number 1, if you want to throw in a couple honorable mentions,
Yeah.
that's fine to do. Just so we can cover all our bases. Because I was like, okay, well, I need to cut off from my honorable mentions because I'm going to keep going. But anyway, so my number 5 is actually Captain America, the First Avenger,
Yeah.
and it probably not to compare it too much with sort of where the Captain America series of movies would go. I kind of think that one sort of captures the within the comics, the time period of Captain America that I enjoy the most. It's over the top. It's very comic booky. It's not really realistic at all. It has that sort of like very like I don't know if nostalgic World War II feel it because you see in a lot of like books from or comics from the 50s and the 60s, like there's enough sort of separation where you can kind of have fun and create almost like fantasy stories associated with World War II, because it's not like, I mean, when you're in kind of the midst of it, it's a little bit different. But I thought Hugo Weaving as Red Skull was great.
Yeah.
Perfect casting. You know, all the I don't know if you ever saw it. I want to say there's my first introduction to Captain America was a cartoon that I'm pretty sure was from the 60s. Like there was not much actual animation to it. It was almost like they would kind of move like the comic book frames a little bit while they're telling the story, sort of a thing. And that kind of more I don't know if innocent is the right word, but you know, kind of throwback story that they have in there, where you know there's it's got comedy. There's a, you know, especially for a Marvel film, there's some pretty good romance as well, kind of thrown into it, which I think you know obviously they kind of pay off later. But like each aspect of it, as I think of like what makes a good comic book movie, for the most part, it kind of hits all those, and it's unique amongst all the other ones, where it's like it takes place really outside of the you know, the modern setting, you know, kind of like with what you're talking about with Guardians, sort of opening it up from a universe perspective. This kind of brings it back. And you know, that's the kind of the story of, you know, the origins, one of the origin stories that I like the most. And it makes, you know, the Captain America character unique amongst a lot of the other ones. So
Oh yeah.
that's my number 5.
And I feel like when you think of the comic book series and growing up, when you would play as a kid, everyone wanted to be Captain America, right? And the iconic, you know, shield, star, and blue circle around it, like it's everyone wants to. It's just the coolest name, you know, especially growing up in the States, right? Like everyone wants to be it. You know, he fights the worst enemies, you know, which are the Nazis. You know, they tailor that for a little more modern with Hydra, but yeah, how can you not love Captain America? You know, and when you watch it, you know, choreographically, like it's the number 1 to watch, right? So it's how you just kind of start the series if you want to watch it in timeline order. So yeah, for sure. Okay, so my number 4, it's another Captain America movie, although it could probably be titled as an Avenger movie, but Captain America Civil War. And I went back and forth on this one. But this one was very interesting in the sense that I think I appreciated it more the more I watched it. Because at first I don't like it. Like I didn't care for Batman versus Superman so much, in the sense that when I felt like, hey, two like brilliant, super powerful heroes they shouldn't be able to be contested against each other that easily, not to like, we're not talking about DC stuff, but like when it came to like that, like I don't really understand, like how are you going to get all these heroes who are friends to fight each other, which was kind of the goal. And so you didn't have a real villain in that sense, but they did it well, and they did it with the Sokovia Accords, which I find is kind of relevant a little bit to some of today's political conversations, in the sense that like what do you want? Do you want government control, or do you want sort of independent autonomy? And you had this like real, political war debate between these two teams. You had Tony Stark, who felt a lot of guilt, over like the repercussions of not only Ultron and Sokovia, but Loki and all of it, right? And then you had Captain America, who felt like he shouldn't be tethered, and makes the point like, well, what if they tell us to go somewhere, but we think we shouldn't? Well, they say we can't go somewhere, but we know we should, And so you get this sort of dichotomy of ethics, really. And then you have like this one, I don't know what you would call him, but he's not a hero, and he was a villain with Winter Soldier, right? And so you have this, but they play him off now as, well, there was this sort of Manchurian candidate brainwashing that was going on. Right? So he wasn't necessarily responsible for what he was doing, but he did some pretty egregious things, which slowly get revealed more and more throughout the movie, culminating in the very end with, hey, the Winter Soldier was responsible for Tony Stark's parents' death, and so that's huge. The Winter Soldier was also responsible for Black Panther's death, which now he makes a good cameo, which is another thing I liked about Civil War, is you get these major character introductions with not only Black Panther, but now Spider-Man. So they kind of come in. And so I like the conversations about the Sokovia Accords. In fact, I want to talk about that a little bit later as well. But that end is just an epic fight scene at the end. Ant-Man's coolest feature is the fact that it's not that he gets small, it's actually the fact that he gets really big. That's kind of the coolest thing that Ant-Man can do. And you have like this great fight in the end. Although neither side at the same time is really no one's trying to kill anybody on the other side. Everyone's just sort of trying to contain, right? Because I think they're fighting, but they don't, but they're trying to like more just stop the other side and not necessarily kill the other side. And then like one last thought that I had on it, I think one side was very heavily weighted, right? I think Iron Man's side, which had Iron Man, War Machine, Vision, Black Panther, Black Widow, that side versus Captain America, Hawkeye, really the only Ant-Man, the only one that they had on that side that like really tipped the scale was the Scarlet Witch, right? And she got sort of like her vision go off and they fight, and like maybe that's like a lover's quarrel foreshadowing or whatever it is. But I think the Iron Man side team was far more powerful, although that's not how it ended up in the end. So anyway, and I thought that was an interesting divide, and then they had to sort of play that going forward into the MCU timeline. But yeah, that's my number 4.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah. So then, my number 4, I'm interested to see if where this one falls on, if it's on your list or not. But it's actually just the Avengers from 2012.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly sitting. This is before kids, much younger, before the virus, and like you could actually go to the movie theater, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember sitting, especially I'd say probably about halfway through, and I was like, I never thought something like this would ever happen, like that they'd actually make a real honest to goodness superhero, Avengers team up movie, and it would be good, and it would be faithful to the comics. Here's just so even before the movies, huge fan of the comics, love the Avengers, love sort of that version of the Avengers, and just there's people point out a lot of sort of kind of nitpicky things, but taking a little bit kind of broader view, it's just like, just think about, Thor, Hulk, Iron Man, Captain
Mhm.
America, all these people,
Mhm.
and it's good and it's fun and it,
Mhm.
it doesn't look ridiculous. They did a very good job with special effects. Um, Great villain. I mean, Loki at his most sort of Lokiest, if that's a word, it probably is.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and then to like the cherry on top of the Sunday, post credit scene. I think it's post credit scene.
Yep.
Introduction of Thanos.
Yes.
And,
Yep.
and that was the moment where I was like, listen, I'm completely satisfied. This is wonderful. This is great. If they never make anything again in the Marvel universe, like, hey, good job, guys. That this was awesome.
Yeah.
And then they sort of introduced that, and it's like, okay, there you go. Well done. You've got what, like 8 years of material to go, kind of a thing to work off of.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we'll talk about the Infinity stuff going forward, but just the newness of it, especially, it was, I thought the director Joss Whedon, great job. He balanced everybody off each other very well. It was very fresh. Great comedy from all the different characters, which was really, I think, the first introduction where they're first interacting, and it was a blast. I could probably rant for that one for a long time, but
Yeah.
give it back to you for your number three.
Yeah, yeah. Just to go off of that, yeah, the cultural impact was huge to the point that yeah, I went to school just outside of New York City, and I was up there for homecoming over a year ago now, right? It was in 2019 era, and they are building a skyscraper that looks like the Avengers building.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah, it was the Tony Stark building originally, right? Then all the letters except for the A
Yeah.
falls off on it. But like that sort of pyramid shape with the helicopter almost platform
Mhm.
sticking out. That building exists in the New York City skyline now since the release of that movie, which I thought was how cool. Yeah, the
Yeah.
fact that they're just embracing it, and they should. All right, for me, number three, I just went to so you had your origin story of Captain America, and I had to go pick Iron Man. And I
Mhm.
don't think it requires a lot of justification. I think this whole thing got launched with Robert Downey Jr. playing this phenomenal Tony Stark character, right?
Mm.
At least in 2008, we are now, well into the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and it was kind of a hard time, in that front. The wars are really losing popularity, if they were ever popular, and it sort of highlighted some of that, some of the Defense Department contracting, shadiness and yada, yada, yada. And so, his character gets established because he gets hit by his own rocket, basically, and now that sets this course of, this never ending things are attacking his body, and he has to create these energy sources to sort of repel that and to keep him safe. Yeah. Anyways, it starts with that, and the original Iron Man suit and costume, and then he decides to build and expand on that. Tony Stark is this sort of playboy-esque, multi-billionaire, super snarky, and he plays it very well, which is a little different from the comic book series, right? And I think Marvel found a lot of success in that, in the sense that a lot of their characters have this comedic side to them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most all of them. I would say maybe not. Captain America's comic side comes out like later, but he's not like a funny guy to begin with, but he wasn't in the comics. Of course, really very few more in the comics, but Star-Lord, hilarious. Thor, hilarious. Bruce Banner, funny guy, and then Paul Rudd and all these, comedic actors now playing superheroes. I wondered how that was going to hit, but since Robert Downey Jr. started it, and then he was sort of this like funny guy to watch, it was just so successful that they just sort of carried on. I think that sort of played into why there was a lot of success there. But yeah, I had to go back to like ground one, Iron Man. It's got to be in the top 5. You know, it's on the Mount Rushmore of Marvel movies, and so that was my number 3.
I think you bring up an excellent point, because when you're talking about superhero, comic films, they're already fantastic, right? As far as like, and not realistic. And I think just enough humor sort of, at least to me, makes the whole thing more enjoyable and more believable. And not to kind of pile on the DC side of things. I think in some of the stuff that they've done, there's a fair amount of humor, maybe not with some of the films. But when that humor is lacking, I think, especially with the Marvel movies, you really see it. Like you kind of you go into it at this point expecting to have, a fair amount of humor, not to the point that it's necessarily comedy, but it really sort of helps, move the story along, I think, in my opinion. So,
yeah.
Cool. All right. So my number 3 is actually not in the MCU.
Okay.
Probably, I go back and forth in this, but growing up, the X-Men, they were as a comic, not necessarily the characters per se, but just as a comic, especially the 60s into the 70s version of those, I love. Straight up love them. So the movie series is a little bit up and down for me, but the my number 3 is, I was ranting before I even got into which one it was, X-Men First Class, actually.
Yeah.
I think the best realization of the Professor Xavier and Magneto characters are in that film, and sort of establishing that dynamic between the two. I think it's Fassbender and, gosh, I forget the other guy's name, the guy who plays Professor X. They'll probably come to me in a 5-10 minutes down the road, but I think that dynamic, which is basically front and center, that's sort of the bulk of the story, is awesome. I love that aspect of it. Magneto is probably one of my favorite villains.
Yes.
And then also just the sort of, kind of like with Captain America, I love kind of like the swinging 60s setting of it. You got the Cold War and all this other stuff. A lot of it's interesting enough, since they'd already used a lot of the main characters in the previous ones, because it was kind of like a soft reboot, I guess you'd say. They got to explore some characters that really didn't get as much sort of face time, like you had the Wolverine cameo, but it wasn't really about Wolverine. There wasn't the Cyclops and stuff like that. So it was it was cool to see a lot of the smaller characters who I knew and loved, from the comics, kind of get a chance to shine a little bit. And again, from the comedic aspect, I think there was enough comedy, even though obviously there were some darker parts as well, that maybe some of the other X-Men films didn't really have. So I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed it when it first came out. It kind of got me back into the X-Men series, and I still enjoy it. So top 2, here we go.
Yeah. So I think that's a great segue with you bringing up Magneto, right? Because I find there are some villains in which the viewer likes, in the sense that, and in a way, Magneto and, Charles Xavier, they have this sort of like mutual respect for each other, right? There's, scenes where they're playing chess against each other, and they're visiting, and there's this like respect for each other, although they're on very different sides of like ethics.
Yes. Well, and real quick, so they've got the same goals. It's how they achieve their goals that are widely divergent, right?
Right. Yeah. Which kind of like there's like some crossover between like the Sokovia Accords in the sense that like in the X-Men realm they had like like the mutant oversight and they wanted to do that and there was a big push against that and Magneto was very against that sort of thing and so yeah I think there's like a lot of good overlap in that conversation as to well what do you do with these these superpowers that exist and how do you good guys are great, but bad guys are bad. And so like, how do you keep that balance in the sense? So a good segue into a villain, which I really liked. And it's not like a surprise, it's Thanos, right? So Thanos, obviously, so far up through phase 3 is the apex villain, right? Super straight that I picked. My number 2 is Infinity War. And what I like about Thanos is, yes, you got the Infinity Gauntlet. Yes, he is so focused and he is so unemotional. Considering everything, he's just like, this is what we're doing. And I saw like a funny meme once that talked about like, yeah, when I spent my childhood thinking I wanted to be Captain America, only to become an adult and realize, yeah, Thanos is right. Like, let's just waste half the population. Like, let's just go back and try to start again because we're screwing it all up. So like, you can almost side with him, and he's very methodical. He knows what he wants. Super powerful, right? Shocking enough, in the very opening scenes of Infinity War, he beats up Hulk, which is like this. No one does. Even like Thor, who fights Hulk, like it's a struggle, right? But like, he kind of manhandles Hulk, which is like very surprising. And so anyway, so Infinity War, A, super suspenseful. B, all the characters are coming in, right? I mean, I don't need to sell Infinity War. I think anyone who knows the MCU and has watched it, they know what an awesome movie Infinity War is. What I loved about Infinity War was the ending, though, in the sense that Marvel took this massive risk when they said, like, okay, Thanos wins. And it's the first time, really, in most superhero movies that the big villain wins, and he wins in doing exactly what he wanted to do. Snaps his fingers, and then all of a sudden, like, big name characters start turning to dust. Black Panther, Spider-Man. I mean, like, big characters just start fading away. Characters who didn't have a whole. Okay, so there was one Black Panther movie prior to that. There was one Spider-Man movie prior to that. So characters that like people knew like this franchise was going to continue on are now being snapped into oblivion. And it's like, oh my goodness. And like, it sent chills. And there was like real anger. I remember like in the theater and people gasping, when certain characters would disappear. And like the real anger in which they were sort of vocalizing was like, yeah. And so it was, you walked out of that movie almost with like this like visceral gut reaction of like, oh, like what was that? And it was so different from all the other, where like maybe you would feel that way at a certain point when the villains looks like they're gonna win, but at the end the hero always finds a way, right? And then there's some recollecting or whatever. But in Infinity War it ended, and something that was pointed out to me but I didn't catch earlier, like during the end credits when they put up the big Marvel logo and then the Marvel turns to dust. And then there was this conversation, I was like, are they just going to end like that? Like, does Marvel now disappear? Like, is this going to be the end? Of course, there was always Endgame, whatever. There's another movie that's going to come out, but they're going to have to walk a lot back to undo that. And so I like the fact that Thanos, he's kind of this, he's not likable in the sense that he's supremely evil, but in the sense that he's very watchable and you can kind of follow him along. He's not obnoxious. I don't like obnoxious villains. And then in the end, it's like, man, like he did it, and now what? And now like they're really in a pickle now, so they got to figure that out. So that was my number 2 movie.
I think 2 reasons why Thanos is so watchable, which you don't see with with many other superhero movie villains. Competent. He's incredibly competent.
Mhm.
Well, like you said, I mean, so meticulous in his planning. But he also he's got real motivation. Like he has conviction, and it's sort of well communicated throughout the movie, and you don't always get that with villains. So I'm sure we'll dive into that whole the Infinity Saga in greater depth as we go forward. But so my number 2 was
Yes.
yes.
There they are.
Yeah,
Yes.
I am
Misfits.
So we did the previous Star Wars show, love Star Wars, somewhat controversial statement coming here. This is, in my opinion, the best Star Wars like movie since the original 3.
I can see that.
Basically everything you said, completely agree with. And the thing that surprised me about this one was just how deep they got with the characters and how much obviously the first one established them, but this one really kind of, you mentioned with Star-Lord and his father, Gamora, Nebula, that sort of sister relationship. Now everyone's basically like the parent for Groot, and oh gosh, the father figure, Mohawk to I forget his
Yondu.
name. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I was shocked at how much screen time he had, how much of a
Yes.
story he had. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I mean, Kurt Russell. Can you really go wrong with Kurt Russell?
Yeah.
I mean,
he sells it. Yeah.
He was pitch perfect. I was very apprehensive going into this one. And I'm pretty sure this is the last film I've actually seen in the movie theater.
Okay.
So it's been a while. But loved it. This is completely off the wall, but have you got a chance to see the disco Guardians of the Galaxy music video that they did with David Hasselhoff?
No, I don't think I've seen this.
When we're finished, when you have time.
Oh yeah.
They have a disco Guardians of the Galaxy song with all the characters in it.
Oh,
but
nice.
It's David Hasselhoff who's singing it. It embodies everything that is Guardians of the Galaxy. It's hilarious.
Yeah, so that's a perfect little sidebar here, but the opening scene in Guardian of the Galaxies 2 when Groot, they're like, no music, we're concentrated, and then Baby Groot plugs it and then Mr. Blue Sky plays.
Yeah.
I played that for my girls and they loved dancing around the living room, and they recognize it when that song comes on. They're like, oh, it's the baby tree. I'm like, yeah. So they play into that really well.
Yeah, I might be talking more Guardians going forward, but James Gunn he's a unique vision. He somehow within this massive corporation that's Disney, he got away with being weird, off the wall, and making it work. Back to you for your number 1.
Yes, my number 1. Okay, so I wanted to go with, I had the debate what do I want as my number 1, and what I kind of narrowed it down to is the one that I not only love watching, but I have watched this one over and over and over, and I will continue to watch this one again because it's just so watchable, and that's Thor Ragnarok. So this sort of culminates with my favorite character in the MCU is Thor. Not only do I just love his superpowers, right? But I think Chris Hemsworth is a perfect cast for that character. Thor matures a lot, over the 3 movies that he was in. I love the fact that Taika Waititi as the director took this real comedic approach to it. You get introduced to some real interesting and fun characters like the Grand Master, and they're on Sakaar, and this crazy waste planet in which all the trash goes to. and Thor becomes like this prisoner there. But I think what I love about that movie, yeah, the soundtrack's awesome. You know, that's always a bonus, right? But I think like what I like about it too is Thor sort of you see like these like vast personalities of like who Thor is. So Thor is very independent, right? And he wants to just, there are problems, he just wants to go take care of them, right? And you see this in other movies, but it opens up and he's captured in this like dungeon and he's in there with somebody else who is literally rotted away to a skeleton. So they're implying that he's literally been in there for years, waiting so he can get close to Surtur, right? Because he's heard this legend of Ragnarok. And he finally like has his chance and he gets close to Surtur. And then it's like, all right, so if I take that like little crown off your head, I can, stop Ragnarok. And then he does, right? And he steals the crown and takes it back to Asgard. And then now Loki's there. And so he's got to like deal with his brother now, continue to bring problems for him. But then, his dad dies, right? And another thing that Thor is, he was always very loyal. He's loyal to Loki, even though Loki gives him every reason in the world to hate him and to abandon him. So then, his father dies, and then there's like this sister that exists, and then the hammer gets destroyed, and he like loses his identity, and he loses his confidence, sort of thing, and he goes to like that whole stage, and then he ends up on Sakaar, and what's his name, Jeff Goldblum, who plays the Grandmaster. Another like awesome cast, yeah. And then Hulk's personality comes out. Hulk can talk. First off, he has vocabulary. Up until that point, Hulk only had like one line in which he said in all the movies, like puny guy, when he like made fun of Loki after he smashed Loki. But now he has like this sort of like infant toddler sort of vocabulary, and he's still Hulk, but he's kind of a toddler, and they're buddies, and this like bantering back with like, strongest Avenger, all like these like great one-liner jokes that are in there. It was great, but another like thing that I sort of really appreciated was, so they go back, right, and they're gonna fight Hela, and but she's unstoppable, right? She's just too powerful for all of them, and so Thor, like through this vision, he sees Odin again, and he sort of talks to him about, Asgard's not a place, it's the people, and so he plays this sort of ultimate chess move where like you got to sacrifice the queen to save the king in this sense, and so they put the crown in the eternal flame, and Surtur turns into the enormous monster, and Ragnarok gets set off, and that's the only way he can save his people, is to basically destroy the planet which he's been trying to protect his whole life. Another comedic thing is you get to see Hulk try to fight Surtur. Yeah. There's like this great cinematographic, and it was part of like the trailer too, where Hulk's flying in like double fist, getting ready to try to, and this Surtur is a massive fire monster. It's just Hulk back to being Hulk, just smash. Right?
Hulk smash.
Yeah. Hulk smash, yeah. And so anyway, so that was my number one, in the sense that I love that movie. It's hilarious. It's sort of at the very end, it tips to the it sets right into Infinity War seamlessly, and I can just watch it over and over and over again, and so that was my number one.
Yeah, if there's one word to describe Thor Ragnarok for me, it's fun. Like there's never a dull moment. It's a blast. It's colorful. It's engaging. So to hint the honorable mentions, the first one I put down was Thor Ragnarok. Yeah. So it's probably not a surprise for my number one that the original Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yes.
Just like I said, love it to death. Rarely is there a balance between, because really, I mean, this is, in some ways you could say it's more of a science fiction kind of space opera film that kind of talk with Star Wars than necessarily like a superhero film. But it seamlessly kind of blends all these different things together. And if you're it'd be interesting to see what the pitch meeting was, right? Like if you were to just read, okay, this is what this movie's going to be, and you're like you hadn't seen anything. It was just, you know, James Gunn coming and being like, this is what we're going to do, or I want to do. You'd be like, you're crazy. That sounds terrible. It'd never work, but somehow it does. And the nice thing is, there's a balance between all the characters. All the characters are given personalities, something to do. And again, I could go wax poetic on Guardians for a long time, but I'll cut it short and basically just say, as far as what's currently scheduled, hopefully, you know, fingers crossed, and they already kicked James Gunn out once, brought him back. Volume 3 is what I am most, what that is already in the works, that I'm most looking forward to. So you could just
my only like hard thing on Guardian, and it's not even Guardian of the Galaxy things, but it's how easily Ronan gets defeated, and not only in Guardians of the Galaxy but also in Captain Marvel, which doesn't really show his true powers in what the comics was, right? I mean, he was the holder of an Infinity Stone, Power Stone, you know, and he was a force to be reckoned with, but not easily, but like, you know, quickly defeated, you know, in Guardians of the Galaxy 1, and then easily defeated, you know, ran away, got chased away in Captain Marvel. And I was thinking like, man, that's like, it's like they wanted to cameo this super popular villain, but then they did it in a way that like he didn't get much screen time, and like you didn't really see like his full power. So I felt like it was like, let's just like shove him in because he's so popular, and people are gonna like love to see him. But then he's so popular because of what he is. And that's like was my only like I wish they did more with the villain in that one.
I didn't mind, because for the most part I enjoyed the arc that Ronan had. I think part of the difficulty is that with Thanos already being established as the big baddie, they kind of had to bring him down a little bit just from a comparison perspective, because you know Thanos was going to be that was going to be who we're kind of building up to. But yeah, I mean, the way he's defeated in Guardians is sort of as ridiculous as the movie is, so I don't mind it. So I haven't seen Captain Marvel, so I can't comment too much on what happens in that one. But
okay, yeah,
it is what it is. Real quick, any other, just want to go through any just real quick honorable mentions for that you have?
Well, the top of my list for honorable mention was Black Panther, in the sense that I thought the casting was fantastic there. Chadwick Boseman was like, he was the perfect T'Challa. And I like this idea of Wakanda being this super secret, super advanced nation. I like the villain. You know, Michael Jordan plays like a great, I think Eric Stevens, I think he goes by Killmonger or something, but he plays like this like real, because you can sympathize with him. You know, his dad was killed and he was abandoned by you know the Black Panther, or you know by the Black Panther's guard, whatever. Like, and he was sort of left, and then when he shows up in Wakanda, he has a rightful place to the throne, right? And so he wins by following basically the rules that are set forth in Wakanda, right? You strip the Black Panther of his superpowers, they fight, and the victor becomes the new Black Panther. And that's like the rules. And so he really followed all those rules and won. And then there was this sort of, the only thing I didn't like about it, and then it sort of led to this sort of civil war. And I guess they had to, right? Because Chadwick had to come back as like, you know, the more ethically, you know, sound Black Panther. But the only thing I didn't care is that it seemed like Wakanda got torn into a civil war like very quickly. And I felt like that's like, I feel like a nation of such super advanced, you know, intellects and technology and rich, like they could be more diplomatic about it, you know. But it went to like, first a Marvel film, right? So you need the great battle, you know, you needed it. So I understand that aspect of it. But yeah, I that was my top honorable mention. And rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah.
I think Letitia Wright playing the new Black Panther. I liked her role as being almost like the like the what was it, Mr. Who was the guy from Batman? I want to say Mr. Fox. His name is
Vincent Fox, I think it is.
Yeah, right. He's the guy in the background running the technology, running like the behind, like making like the calls as the coach, and the Black Panther being more the quarterback in the game. I think it may have fit a little bit better with Oki playing Black Panther, but we'll see going forward. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, but that was my top honorable mention.
Cool. Yeah, we already talked about Ragnarok, so that's easy. So for real quick, just to kind of transition into just thinking a couple comments about the Infinity Saga in general. So I actually just watched Endgame the first time last night to kind of complete the circle. And I came away. Yeah. So two things. Obviously there's some things I liked. There's some things I didn't like about Endgame. The biggest kind of takeaways I had was just thinking about the I probably read this 20 years ago is when I first read this, right? So it's like you've already got in your mind this is how the story's supposed to go. A major difference that I think made the Infinity Saga within the movies difficult was in the comic. Obviously, in both, the antagonist is Thanos, right? He's the big baddie. In the movies, it's a group of protagonists, right? Like it's kind of a constantly shifting thing. I'd say probably Captain America and Tony Stark, Iron Man are probably the two main ones, but there's a ton, right? In the comic, it was Adam Warlock, who I mean, he was an end credit scene. That was it. So obviously you can't do a lot with him, but within that story, he was really he was the protagonist. He was kind of the man with the plan, and kind of secondary Silver Surfer and Doctor Strange. But I think it sort of tied on the hero side, sort of the narrative and the plan together to make it a little more streamlined. Obviously, you're talking about like how many movies things are going to be a little bit bigger and broader. So that was one of the big differences. And also, for in the book, the finger snap is spoilers. It's at the beginning. It's right at the beginning, right? If you're making a movie, you want that to be kind of what you said. You want that to be the end. You want that to be sort of the cliffhanger so that people come back for Endgame, right? But there's also then a problem of, okay, well, how do we undo that? And obviously it's how it plays out in the Infinity Gauntlet is much different than the films, but they pulled it off. Like it's an actual ending where they kind of, as best as possible, kind of bring it all together. Which, I mean, how are you going to basically do that? Give everyone has their favorites. Everyone has like, well, you need to give screen time to all these different people. So I think with what they had, I think they did a great job in that sense. I could nitpick Endgame to death, but that's not really what the other just so I've got a thought. So obviously you're not a big Star Wars guy. When I compare how the MCU did it, I think there's a lot of similarities where if the Avengers and A New Hope, the first film, very similar in the sense of like it brings the team together, it sort of explains what the threat is. Empire Strikes Back and Infinity War, the good guys lose. The good guys lose, and you're left sort of hanging. And then, and interestingly enough, not to go too deep into the Star Wars thing, I think a lot of the issues with Endgame are actually very similar to the issues that I have with Return of the Jedi, where you're trying to wrap so many different things up with so many different characters, and sometimes ending a story is more difficult than sort of the middle act where you can kind of shock everybody. So there's a lot of similarities I see between that. For me personally, as soon as they introduced Thanos, I wanted the Infinity Saga to be the emphasis. But obviously, if you want to make a lot of movies, you want to make a lot of money,
Yeah.
you know. So those are some of the differences that I think, the difference between the comic and a film series, they're just not compatible. But those are kind of the things that I took away. So, what are your thoughts on the saga at large?
Yeah, so this is like my main problem with, and why I don't like to watch TV series, just in general, right, is because in order to like keep the suspense, you always have to introduce more questions into the timeline.
Yeah.
And so, weird sidebar, I watched the whole Lost series when they're popular, almost like 10 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
But like they open up so many questions throughout all the seasons that when they tried to wrap it up and answer those questions at the end, they just left so many questions unanswered. And so that can be hard with like a wrap-up movie. It's because you introduce all these nuggets and Easter eggs and questions, and new theories, and then now you need to close that out. I'll say the Russo brothers, they did the best that they could. Right?
That's good.
They closed out a ton of questions and timelines. They did like tons of like character integration. The final epic battle scene, which I've probably watched a dozen plus times. They had these sort of like little scenes within, so everyone gets like their sort of whack at Thanos, which was good. The only thing that is probably the only way they could do it, but the only thing that, like, whenever you start introducing time travel into a movie or into like a theme, it's very hard to keep that clean.
Yeah.
Right. Because butterfly effect, right? And so time travel always makes things very hard. And they talk about it, right? And there's a comedic side, where Ant-Man comes back as a baby.
Yeah, Back to the Future, right? I mean, but that's what it is. It's essentially the Back to the Future plot.
Yeah.
In the middle of the movie, Hey, listen, real quick, we're gonna pause just 1 second.
Okay.
While I get the baby, and then we can finish up. So just give me.
Speaking of babies,
right back.
Perfect. All right.
Back to the Future.
yeah, which I love how they sort of joke about, right? Like Ant-Man's only reference to time travel is what he's seen from the movie Back to the Future, and Bruce Banner calls him out on that, or Smart Hulk, or whoever he is at that point. But yeah, I like Endgame. Endgame had to have obviously the epic battle scene at the end when everyone gets called in. And then, and then the ultimate sacrifice from Iron Man, right? So if it begins with Iron Man, then I thought it was like such a cool, salute to him that it ends with Iron Man. Iron Man gets it. And what does he say? I am Iron Man, and snaps his finger right into the song. I mean, it's perfect, right? And then it's hilarious because I'm watching it in the theater. I'm getting choked up, laughing at myself because character is dying, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel so emotionally attached. But all the sniffles and within the theater, because I saw the first opening week, and it's just hilarious, just how like emotionally invested everybody was. So yeah, I liked it. I would say the only thing is, when you do it like that, like they were trying to do everything, right? So like a lot of the battle scenes, felt like not maybe unnecessary, in some sense, but everyone had to have their, their whack at Thanos, as short as they could live it. Things that I love, Captain America got the hammer, which is awesome. I wish, like, when Thor fat Thor is hilarious. I love fat drunk Thor. Although I wish, like, when he does the final costume change, lightning bolt at the end, his beard gets braided, but he's still fat the Hulk. I was like, or fat Thor. I was like, he probably could be. I wish he was fit Thor at the very end. Like, here he's finally getting his real vengeance. He's finally going to be able to avenge his brother and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But and then the only other thing I didn't care for is at the very end, when Thanos makes the comment, like, typically I don't enjoy doing this, but like I'm going to take pleasure in destroying your planet. Because that's atypical Thanos.
Yeah.
For a guy who's destroyed a lot of societies and a lot of planets, he's never like been personal about it. But now all of a sudden he's going to take it personal. And I feel like they were on a hunt for like a good line in which they could now. I didn't think it was, like Thanos he stands on his own with his own sort of premise and goals. And so like you didn't need to change his sort of character because of that.
No.
Like he wouldn't have taken it personally. It's just like it's basically business for him.
Well, Thor kills him in the beginning, and he doesn't take it personal at all. He's just like, well, yeah, this is what I would expect you would do, just based on what I've previously done. You know, yeah. For me, I mean, if it were up to me, what I would have done would be, where he's got the wife and daughter. That's an alternate reality now.
Mm-hmm.
Have it so you say your goodbyes. He's got his epic moment. You still get the finger snap, but do it. Do the finale in the way that it's a goodbye. But he's got his family. He's going into this alternate dimension, and he's not coming back.
Yeah,
that would be me.
Okay.
That'd be my. But like I get it. I get it. I'm sure the actor probably wanted a great death scene and stuff like that as well.
Uh-huh.
But, cool. All right. Well, let's finish up with our. You get to be in charge, and if you could make your own movie or series based on the characters that are already out there, what would you do?
Yeah. So $1 million question. Or I literally $20 billion question, right?
Yeah.
So it's fun to think about. So looking at the timelines that are coming forward that Marvel has already released, you got a couple origin stories coming out. You got a couple, new Black Panther coming out, a new Thor coming out, and so you kind of continue a new Spider-Man. So you kind of continuing on. But they're going to have to wrap their head around who's the new Thanos, right? Who's going to be the new, and so I think that would be fun to explore. And I think they're going to touch on that with the Eternals. I think that's going to be really cool. But I can see like now we're starting to get a little more of the Celestials, and so now you're starting to get into like some real supervillains. I would like to see the siblings, Eternity, Oblivion, Infinity, and Death, right? So those four, and then maybe now you need to flip some villains, like some villains who maybe now they need to fight with the heroes, and they, so like you could have this sort of those four could be like this like super massive problem for the universe, which is going to require a lot more than just brute strength like that Captain Marvel may have. I would also love to see some dark spin-off movies. I think so. The Sokovia Accords, right? Which I like this fascinating idea that they still exist, right? And now that Endgame's over, things aren't necessarily back to normal. Like there are going to be repercussions, and there are going to be questions, and like if you all sign this, you all would have been together to stop it to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could spin off the Dark Avengers. And so I think you could do like this Sokovia Accords pushing, and then all of a sudden like these Dark Avengers come out. And I think you could even do this like Dark Avengers, and who's going to counter the Dark Avengers? I feel like only like Wakanda could do that, right? And so like you need like this like nation state of, this army to be able to, with like super technology to be able to stop the Dark Avengers. Maybe like they use the Sokovia Accords as part of the proxy to do that. So I think those would be two that would be fun. Obviously, like everyone wants to see Venom and Spider-Man in the same movie, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
Carnage.
Sony, Yep. They want to see those two fight each other because Venom without Spider-Man is not that great, and so you need Spider-Man and Venom to fight each other. And like you mentioned, I would love to see the crossover link between X-Men and Avengers.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that would be super cool to see, but I think that requires like a total recasting, and it is going to require a lot of thought, about how we want to do this in the long run. They can't just do like one movie like that, and then they're going to have to build on a franchise and a lot more origin stories and everything else. But I think those are some of the ones that I would love to see, short term and long term.
Yeah,
the MCU.
Yeah, he's chewing on my Guardians of the Galaxy Blu-rays right now
Yes.
to keep him.
I see a lot of that in his future. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. He didn't have much of a choice, unfortunately, for him. So for me, like I'm like, instead of going big, what I would love to see them do is do the opposite.
Okay.
As well, in addition to, and go small. This is really weird, real obscure, but I love horror, and I love like gothic horror. So like Dracula, Frankenstein, all that kind of thing, right? And in the 70s, they did they had a line of comics. It started, it was called The Tomb of Dracula, right? And they brought in, the werewolf, all these different characters, but they essentially did like the Dracula story in the 70s. And that's where Blade was introduced. And especially like the 90s Blade movies were fine for what they were. But I would love to see like retro, a little funky, but a horror series in the 70s, like bring back Tomb of Dracula, introduce Blade. You can call it like Blade and the Tomb of Dracula or something like that. Go full horror. Doesn't have to be big budget. Let Blade, hunt down vampires and monsters and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of other characters as well, like the descendants of like Van Helsing and stuff like that. It doesn't need to be a big budget because there's no like planetary baddies and stuff like that. It'd make for a fun series that could go for a while. It would reintroduce Blade. You could eventually maybe bring in like Ghost Rider and a lot of like, the more kind of darker Marvel characters who it's like, okay, they've done some of it, but I don't think they've necessarily done it that well, but kind of put them in there like a monster verse sort of a thing. That's what they would never do it, but I think it would be a lot of fun. So
you can do like some good spin-offs of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then you could, because there's a spin-off that's called Werewolf at Night, which is all about like he's sort of like more of an anti-hero, but he's kind of like almost like a Hulk type of a character, but from like a werewolf perspective. So that's what I got. Little guy's getting all active and wanting to get into the computer here. So I think that's probably a good time to wrap it up. So hey, thanks so much to Cam for being on. This was an absolute blast. I'm so glad we're able to do it. Next Friday, so stay tuned. Next Friday, Stephen Reed is coming back, and we're doing a Iron Maiden episode. The twist, it's going to be what happened. So it's going to be really kind of an emphasis on like their later years and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll see you soon as well. Again, if you have any comments or ideas, if you've got your own top 5, please feel free to put them in the comments section. And that's it. Take care.
Thanks a lot, man. It was a blast.